BSides DC 2017 videos are brought to you by Threat Quotient, introducing the industry's first threat intelligence platform designed to enable threat operations and management, and Data Tribe, a new kind of startup studio co-building the next generation of commercial cybersecurity, analytics, and big data product companies.
Grab a seat, everybody. I'm going to try to get right into it since the time's kind of tight and I got a lot to talk about. So my name's Chris Enzi, Chief Operating Officer at Dunbar Cybersecurity. I'm also the project lead for the Siphon project, which I'll talk about a little later in this presentation. But really what I want to talk about today is incident management and how we can take and more formalize, I guess, the way that every organization is doing this by using open source community-driven model. And just to start this off, a little bit of my background. I've been in this InfoSec space for probably going on 20 years now. Most of my background's been in DoD, Intel, world cleared type of work and big projects doing security for different defense systems, things like that. More recently, I've been sort of working in the commercial space, and really it kind of started to look at where problems were emerging inside of commercial enterprises where they were managing high volume of incident. And that could be anything from like events, alerts, whatever it may be, but nobody seems to do it the same way. They certainly don't do it consistently, and there seems to be where a lot of the problems sort of bubble up that catch people off guard. So this talk is going to be about how, A, my current organization has observed this, I think B, what we've tried to do to help address it, and how that applies to a security operations center environment, which is what we live in every day. So we run a SOC as an MSSP, and that's basically about as much as I'll say about that. So really what I want to start with is, what do we define as an incident? And so I'm going to categorize this really into two specific areas. So pre-processed type of content and then post-processed content. And to dive right in, I mean, what we look at often is, we get a ton of data from logs and events. We have audit trails that are out there. All that I'm kind of defining as pre-processed, like incident content. And then the post-process stuff is really what comes to all of our desks. And that's where you get a trailhead or you get some sort of notification that is fundamentally actionable. And really, this is high volume even in of itself. So that pre-process stuff is like millions and millions of events. The post-process stuff is probably thousands and thousands of events. And we're suffering from like an onslaught of this every day. So if you're like me, you got your inbox and it's completely annihilated with just crap that you got to somehow filter out. And what ends up happening is you dump all that noise into some sort of subfolder. And the downside of this is you just never see stuff. So it's going to get filtered by some sort of generic criteria and dumped into some sort of subfolder. You have this unread message count that keeps going up and up and up, and eventually you just call bankruptcy and you just wipe the whole damn thing out. And that's what everybody does. It's every organization suffers from this. And so take that into account in a team environment, and you have peers, you have your IT department or your InfoSec department or your IR team, whatever it may be, and you try to do any kind of accountability with that. You never know who's going to address what. You're always saying, hey, Steve's the guy that does antivirus stuff, so he must have taken care of it. And so email's crappy in a sense because it fails us all the time. It's very binary. It's read or unread. So addressing these problems, everybody says go buy a SIM, go buy Splunk. Well, that doesn't really work either, because unless you go out and spend a chunk on enterprise security, or you've got some sort of way to manage who did what and what audit trail or set of accountability measures you want to put in, you're going to have to build a custom app on top of that and sort of roll your own solution. Ticketing systems obviously are a complete failure, because the second you get anything high volume, you got to just basically wipe everything out anyway. It's completely unactionable. So with the volume of issues that all of us see every day, how are we able to really deal with this in a consistent manner that kind of enforces some set of policy and control? So in our organization, we, as an MSSP, we're trying to face this from not just one organization, but every organization we work for. So we do SOC services for them. They send us all their data, all their alerts from all their devices. And we had to deal with this in a multi-tenancy scenario. We got to deal with it at scale. So we started looking at all the commercial options that were out there. back 5 years ago when we first stood up our SOC. And we ran into a lot of problems with the options in the marketplace, or even really in sort of the open source community. So SIM tools, just in general, everybody's gone out and priced Splunk probably at this point. You know the story there. It's high volume pricing. You have to get these kind of additional premium add-ons to really get a lot of the great benefits that can address some of the workflow that you're going to have to do day in, day out. And then finally, now you've got this big behemoth infrastructure that you got to maintain as well. Can get a little cumbersome. And I've seen a lot of SIMs get deployed in a lot of organizations, and more often than not, they're just a repository for events and logs, and nobody ever looks at them. Orchestration tools are kind of the next big thing. There's some really good products coming out. I think the market's still a little untested in terms of those solutions. Interoperability is the big issue. I kind of lived in a world where business process management, or BPM tools, were a big thing for sort of more web services oriented orchestration about 10 years ago. And the findings there were, yeah, it's great the first time you set it up, but then 6 months later when somebody upgrades something, everything breaks. So I think we're still going to see that. I think there's a lot of maintenance associated with tools like Phantom and Mule ESB and some of these other products that are out there now. Enterprise ITSM, really not set up yet for security the way I think a lot of organizations want it to be. And then finally, threat hunting tools. They're really great tools. They give you a lot of horsepower and capability, a ton of analytics and pivot capability, but sometimes it's too much for just general actionable tasks. So when we were looking to try to find something to manage what we were doing, we kind of had a set of criteria we were looking at. Really, the whole purpose for us was, I don't care how the event was fired, I just need to be able to manage every event. I need to be able to look at everything and drill in and find out what happened, how it happened. Do I care about it? Can I dump it? And really enable team collaboration was the top of this. We have a relatively good-sized SOC team. They're all going to be working on different tasks. They all have different skill sets. So let's enable that. Let's make something that, or find something that can give them the ability to work as a team. It's not Slack, it's not chat, but it's something that's actually retaining some of that knowledge base. We want to track accountability, who did what, when, how, why. We want to find something to help us enforce a consistent incident management process. We didn't want to invent it necessarily from the ground up. We wanted just to kind of be able to take some best practices and piece it together so that we then created a standard we followed every day. And then create a knowledge base. We want to retain this information forever, make it actionable and searchable as well. That way we can do some regression analysis, look how people made decisions, what decisions may have been bad versus good, and then trend line that over time. We want some light orchestration, I'll say. Not go over the moon in terms of automating every little incident and sending things out to VirusTotal and changing this parameter in the firewall on the fly. It wasn't really something we were concerned about as much because of the fact that we can't decide what our clients are putting in their environments. It's not up to us, it's up to them. We're just trying to make sure that every event is being managed. And then automating prioritization, analysis, and then we have a million different source types, so it has to be really flexible. So we couldn't find anything, long story short, and we had to just say, okay, let's try to build it. And we looked at the open source community, looked at tools that are in development, took a little bit of idea over here from an orchestration product, sampled something out of a ticketing system over here, and started to piece together some use cases. So we came up with a project called Siphon. And about 4 months ago, we open sourced this, so it's available out there. Encourage everybody to check it out. I'd love some feedback as we go through this. I'm going to show you just some details about what we built. Contributions of the community have been really helpful in that. So what we decided to really address was this kind of workflow from left to right. So we have information coming from a million different places. It's all different formats. How can we get into a system that can help us to manage the alert flow? And starting with, can we bundle things so that it's not high volume, 1,000 alerts coming at once, flood the gates, and then nobody can see the other stuff. So let's smash that together, get it together so it's actionable. Categorize them. Where did they come from? What's the priority of these alerts? And then finally connect them to other data sources that are actually helping us to better analyze what's going on. Like, why did that alert fire? What action was taken? What action should be taken next? So in that team environment, being able to show this and work with other analysts or other people on your team is absolutely critical. So we have to make a capability that can connect the dots from one skill set to another on the team, pass the ball back and forth, and make sure things get done to some sort of level of closure, and then track that transition process. And then finally, we wanted to build something that was flexible enough to respond in a lot of different ways. So in a default use case, I'll show you later, it's really like create a next level ticket, right? So we talked about ticketing systems. They're only really good once you decide something needs to be done. And so kind of being able to pass analysis into a ticketing system was the first orchestration use case we wanted to address. So that was the first piece. Then we have an open framework basically that can kick off other processes, call RESTful or web service APIs. Even if we have an integrated API that can be a part of a perimeter solution, maybe call that the block and IP. So make all that possible. So this is what it looks like, and I apologize for the kind of washed out screens. Lighting in here sucks. But all things told, you can see it online. So we designed this basically for SOC analysts. Siphon's a completely open source platform. We've got the ability basically there to triage events as they come in. We can give some relative level of dashboarding analytics. We're working on improving this right now. And we're also monitoring event flow. So the big thing for us was great that we're getting actionable alerts, but what happens when that device stops sending us stuff? We want to know. So SIM's not that great at that. They're okay as long as you can set thresholds, but sort of getting data versus not getting data isn't something that's really, unless you're actually monitoring visually, they're not really good at telling you that all the time. So we had to solve that problem. We created a priority rules engine framework that is customizable for every type of event coming through the system. So if you basically say, hey, when X happens, I want it to be this priority, or when these couple of different parameters all together work in some sort of equation, then I set it to this level of priority. So you have that ability to custom code all that. And then really, our team's really doing the maintenance on it at Dunbar Cybersecurity, but we're really starting to see some good uptick in the community that's being built around this. So I encourage you to check it out, like I said before. What it looks like is basically there's a waterfall, as I call it, in the display. And that gives you the ability to basically drill into every event as it comes through the system. And within this waterfall, you can get alerts from really any tool you're using today at any level of your security architecture. So that could be everything from AV alerts that are just coming out of whatever product you've deployed on endpoints to maybe you've got Snort or Bro running on your network, sniffing traffic. You may get alerts from things like Splunk that you've already created custom queries for that are going to fire into this dashboard. So I want everybody to kind of think about this as a kind of fascia above all of these other tools that have the capabilities that you have already deployed. It's not intended to sort of do user entity analytics or some sort of crazy connect the dots capability that happens in a very specific type of attack pattern. It's designed to get all those events from all of those different tools and put them into one place so you can sort of work through them and then look for correlations within that higher level order of magnitude, and then track how things are reacted to, how they're managed. And so we've also done some things with operational IT, bringing like CloudWatch metrics in from maybe AWS. We're working with integrating other outbound calls to web services for things like lookups for blacklists, watch lists, hashes, things of that nature. So growing the capability over time. So kind of the use cases here. So alert management. So really anything that comes through the system, you can customize the alert levels. You can sort of say, hey, I think this is going to be a high rate alert or a critical alert. I can assign it to different analysts if I'm a manager on the team, kind of ship that out to my subject matter experts for their tasking. Throttling those alerts. So get 20,000 of the same event because of a port scan or some denial of service attack. That's going to be one event in the system, one line to address. So it really squishes that all down. And then finally, tagging. We're doing entity extraction out of every alert. And I'll talk a little bit why this is critical, but what we see in the future, something we're trying to build out is an ability to do some machine learning here based on tags that are getting extracted from events so that we can basically say, as an alert's managed by a particular analyst with a certain expertise or skill set, these tags can be relatively similar or identical to that next alert that comes 6 months later. I can now elevate the past analysis to the eyes of that new alert so that the analyst is immediately informed of the best way to manage it and how other things have been done in the past to address it. So those outcomes are being tracked as well. Those are all customizable based on whatever preference you have for defining outcomes. And then comments and collaboration. So analyst comes in here, starts working on this issue, does some second order analysis, documents it, decides, hey, maybe I'm going to pass the ball to somebody else. If somebody else comments on that, they're going to get a notification to come back and revisit it. So really keeping them engaged. And then finally actions. I talked about sending things like tickets out. That's another area where we're obviously able to take some action based on every alert. In the event that you create a ticket, it brings back that ticket number, so there's a direct linkage between your ticketing system and Siphon itself. So pivoting. So every piece of event or alert that we get in the system, obviously there's other stuff happening. So not only are we capturing those post-processed events, those incidents that are important to manage, we're also capturing all the pre-processed stuff, the raw logs, the stuff you find in a SIM. So on our architecture, the back end of this is Elasticsearch, Postgres, built on Python, and React for the front end. So this is all our ability, and watch that slides, to basically give us the ability to dive into very specific details of what happened within that alert, but also create predetermined pivots or context lookups on every alert that comes in. So if I say I got a endpoint alarm that went off because of some malicious unwanted application running, I want to see all the net flow from different perspectives throughout the entire set of metadata that I captured from like my bro feed. So we're shipping all that bro content into our SIM. I can then carve it up, look at what actions were happening, what different requests are being made, DNS calls, whatever it may be. And for an analyst that's relatively new or wants to do this really quickly, they can just take advantage of these context lookups to pull data basically with these predetermined searches. So that's a really quick way to like dig in a little deeper, kind of find that second order of research, and then move on to the next thing. And honestly, within these events, the rate at which we're managing them, you really only spend a few minutes with each one to determine, hey, is this actionable enough to take to a deeper investigation or a deeper incident response? So from a standpoint of the next layer of this, we wanted a more robust, comprehensive search as well. And when I first started this project with our team, we were like, all right, this isn't going to be a SIM. It's going to be kind of complementary to that. And unfortunately, as we started really using it day in, day out in our SOC, the having to jump into another tool was starting to become a little cumbersome. So we said, well, we're already shipping the data into the back-end Elasticsearch database. We have all these indexes as well as raw data. Let's just create a front end for that. And so we created a pretty robust search front end that gives us the ability to not only kind of dive in to the alerts and then search the entire context of every alert that's ever been captured and all the analysis that was done and any comment that was made, but we also can search the raw data on the back end that was associated with that. So if you're pulling in bro connection logs or connection files, you can then like look at those session tags and actually track the whole thing throughout this back end. It's almost like a front end for those things. I'm sure some folks in here are using like Security Onion or some of these other tools in like your lab environment or whatever it is, or even in production. This is a great way to actually manage some of that content. Ship it in with a file beat, send it up here, and then you have one place to view all of your different sensors that are out there. So this is just another view of just sort of other data sets coming in on the raw end. So as you'll see, we're managing like millions of events through the system. Scales really well. Doesn't require a significant amount of horsepower to use it. I mean, we're leveraging Elasticsearch sort of as the fundamental back end of it, so it really helps with scalability, performance, ability to index really rapidly. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump up and ask. Other types of data sets. So we're also bringing in really other context information. So Nessus is an example, pulling that into the system, making that queryable right from here. So you can kind of really pivot off of different data sets and use other complementary information that you have in your set of tools to make that analysis a little bit easier. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, so with throttling, is that sort of your way of doing like handling regressions, for instance? Like if you have like some alerts coming in, because I know I've actually used Siphon. I've deployed it. So like, is it based off of like the label that is defined, or yeah, I'm just curious.
So we're looking mostly at identical content. So you can define in, I don't get into the weeds on like the Siphon like language, but the watchdogs that you define that actually are pulling in those alerts, they're going to use the similar level of content to define the throttling. And so you can set up those muzzles, which is what the throttling components are called, to essentially look for those things and give a window of time that you want to throttle. So if something only happens once an hour, you may not throttle it. But if it's 20,000 times within an hour, yeah, you'll throttle that down to a single event.
Okay. All right, thanks.
I mentioned before we were doing some light orchestration with this. So right now we do integrated Jira for our purposes, and looking for other opportunities to expand the capability there. We're looking at kind of shipping things out to VirusTotal, Joe Sandbox, calling out blacklist checks. Another thing I'm really interested in doing is some of these workflow engines that are out there, like Phantom and others. I think there's some interesting opportunities to connect what we're doing in Siphon directly to those tools. So we have this content in these messages and alerts that are coming out, and we have the ability to parse that out and then call any web services framework from there. So we seriously just take some of that content and ship it into one of these orchestration engines and let them take off. We're not looking to build necessarily that piece of it, but there's some cool ones out there. Walkoff is an example that could be potential good integration points that we're looking at as well. Within Siphon, there's a whole administrative backend that makes this a lot easier from a standpoint of configuring your alerts, parsing data coming in, setting up alarms, setting up monitors. Now, one of the things we'll talk about here in a little bit is sort of how do you connect this to some of these other data sources. You can also configure all your context lookups and some of those pivots that you want to have defined in the system. And all of that's very easy to configure within this back end. So where does this sit? So really from a fundamental standpoint of like incident management workflows, we are trying to get data into this tool from a lot of different pieces of the story. So when you think about security operations for sort of bottom up, we're enabling you to sort of dump a lot of this content into Siphon from really anything from just the collection-oriented side of this all the way up to that mitigation point. So if the vision for us is continue to feed data in, track sort of the interplay between all these different buckets, and document that. And if we can help with sort of one step to the next in the automations that we're building, I think we can make a lot of this independent tool management a lot more easier and effective. So it's really taking this as an example. We see stuff that's coming in from raw logs. We've got events that are firing from all these different detection devices. We're running rolling queries through our SIM, and those are firing events and alerts. Bringing that all together, allowing analysts to do correlation in Siphon, and then taking actions that follow on to the remediation. So that's really the vision and goal. So we do support some other use cases as well. So within Siphon, we've actually integrated threat intel management. So we're feeding a ton of data into it. We've got some like long-term plans there to really make it easier to try to manage a lot of different threat intel feeds of different formats and quality. We've actually originally built Siphon to do social media management. So our parent company is Dunbar Armored. They have like 90 some odd locations across the country. And as an armored truck company, the last thing you want to see on Twitter or Instagram is somebody taking a selfie with $100,000 of cash next to them. So we started really tracking the social media, and we built Siphon. The original framework for it was based on actually crawling all these social media APIs and both geotagging or geofencing our locations, but also looking for different topics and keywords. So we did that, sucked all that data in, and then realized it was scaling really well. And then we did it for tracking drug dealers all across Miami-Dade County in Florida. And that was really interesting. And we got like hundreds of gigs of data in for that. And we said, wow, this is really scaling well. So then we pivoted and went to a more security-oriented use case that's more specific to what we were doing at Security Operations Center. So we're also using this in terms of monitoring DevOps, different triggers and events that are going off within our clusters, and then physical security. How do we tie this into access control systems, cameras that have metadata and alerts that can go off? Also, say for example, we see other types of alarms that we want to take action on, and we can create different actions that could be called into other tools that we have. So back to that threat intelligence use case. Threat intel is sort of very dynamic right now. There's a lot of different format types. You get these notifications from InfraGard, as an example, that come out in PDFs, and some folks get them in an API, but other folks just get these kind of publications on a regular basis. Sometimes you get it just as block lists that you can download. Critical Stack puts out some really great ones for Bro, as an example, that you can integrate right into your sensor. But there's a million different ways this data is coming out, and there's some really good projects going on. Styx and Taxi as an example, that are trying to standardize at least the distribution and the formatting side of it. So that, in addition to the stuff you're just going to read in a forum or Reddit or whatever it may be, all that data is relevant. And the closer we can get that threat intel to the stuff that we're doing to manage incidents, the better off we're going to be at large. So part of what I'm trying to steer the team towards with Siphon is, how can we take the things that we've learned in processing thousands and thousands of events every day and use that to train Siphon through just jamming all the threat intel we can get our access to into Siphon, and using the auto tagging that we're doing to connect the dots between really good threat intel or even decent threat intel and the events that are coming through our system. So we're starting to build the plumbing for that today. And granted, I have a really small team, so it's going to take time. But so that's why community, hopefully engage. If you can develop, help us out. But we're looking at how we can pull in more APIs, stream more data into the system, build up this corpus of knowledge that sits right alongside of the threats that we have. So hopefully we're making some good connections there. So we're also trying to make more of a intentional use case on Siphon, and with the different capabilities we're building to support threat hunting. So more than just it being a buzzword, how can we take the tools you're already using to do threat hunting and support the process of using them by way of Siphon, and then also document the outcomes. So in our architecture, sort of the bulk of what's going on here is already happening, at least the way we use Siphon internally, managing our intelligence, doing the hunting itself with other tools, but also documenting what those the hunt outcomes were, maybe using that as a way to initiate a hunt from different programmatic APIs, and then finally tracking response. So we're going to build this out more to support different expansion on this use cases, different tools that are in that playbook, that toolkit you use today, whether it's using OS query or OSEC or GRR or whatever it may be. We want to be able to feed that data, any actionable information, into Siphon, continue to build up this corpus of knowledge. That helps your team understand where problems emerged, what the efficacy of it was in terms of the tools you're using today. If we're seeing some analytics out of Siphon which are saying, hey, we're seeing mostly false positives for this one tool, that's information that's beneficial to you. So we're also going to work on, I think in general, trying to improve the analytics that we're reporting on within the data set we're building. Easy deployment options that we may have available. Docker, obviously everything's a Docker Compose file. You can download the scripts and everything and run it. Or VMware. We do have a VM that's out there if you just want to do a quick and dirty build. That's relatively straightforward and easy. You can download it on our website, siphon.io, and the Docker builds are on GitHub, so I recommend going there. Latest release that just came out this past week, we added the data taggers, which is kind of coming back to the data taggers. We're automatically doing entity extraction from every message and event that comes through the system, in addition to analyst comments and analysis. So if we find something that's a keyword or something relevant, the auto taggers are pulling that out. And the core piece of that is that we want to eventually make them into articles. And so we also released in this latest build the articles capability. That's just really a scaffolding for it there. But the idea is every tag can be associated with an article, which can then be a knowledge repository for analysts as they're doing their investigation. So, this signature ID represents these types of findings. This port's commonly associated with these services. Those are the type of tag articles that we're starting with, and we're going to expand that. And our goal is, hopefully, over time, as we start pushing more threat intel into Siphon, that's automatically generating some of that article content on the fly, so you're linking those pieces together really efficiently. Also the system-wide search in the front end for articles, link support, additional actions, REST and taxi. That's probably going to be in the 1.6 release, some part of that. So we got a lot of work to do, but it is coming together. So as far as learning more, we've got a GitHub repository, seeing a lot of folks getting involved there. Gitter chat if you've got support questions. Our team has been engaged there, and also there's some really great people in the community that are helping to support each other there, which is really cool to see. We've actually spent 3 months, took a whole summer to do documentation. So the documentation, unlike a lot of projects, is actually okay. It's pretty comprehensive. The team did a great job. And obviously we have our landing page on siphon.io. So I encourage you to check it out. As far as just some shout outs, 3 developers know this is being recorded, so hopefully they see this. Leela Hajcik, who's our lead engineer on the project, has been working on this for like the last 2.5 years. And Chase Brewer, who does our UI, and then David Gidwani, who's our DevOps guy. So it's a really small team that's kind of managing it today. I do a lot of the just kind of idea stuff, and they have to deal with that. But generally speaking, as the community's been growing, we've been getting good contributions, some pull requests, so I'm hoping to see that continue. And like I said, it's there for you guys to use, and if you want to download it and kick the tires on it and try it out in your environment, and hopefully add some value. But I think it's something I've seen that has been a missing piece in a lot of organizations, especially where there's a large team, they're trying to manage issues and ensure that nothing's missed. So give us your feedback. And if we've got features that we're missing and you think would be beneficial to add, please tell us to get working, and we'll try to get them in the queue or help build them. So with that, I think I went through that kind of quick, but happy to answer any questions you might have. No? All right. Well, thank you.